3,274 years ago, the most powerful man on earth rode his chariot into a trap. He was surrounded. His army was scattered. His generals had fled. He was alone, one man, one chariot, one horse, against 20,000 enemy soldiers. He should have died. Every single piece of logic, every rule of war, every shred of common sense said this man was finished. Instead, he fought his way out, killed hundreds with his own hands, turned a catastrophic defeat into, somehow, a legendary victory. And then he spent the next 60 years telling everyone about it. His name was Ramesses II, and this is the story of the most famous battle in ancient history, the Battle of Kadesh. The day one man's ego nearly destroyed an empire and saved it. Welcome back. Today we're going 3,000 years into the past, into the scorching deserts of what is now Syria, to witness one of the most dramatic, chaotic, and honestly kind of hilarious military disasters in all of human history. Because here's the thing about the Battle of Kadesh that nobody tells you in school. Ramesses II basically lost. He rode straight into an ambush, got separated from his entire army, panicked, prayed to his God, then somehow survived, and then spent the rest of his very long life pretending it was the greatest victory ever won. He carved it onto temple walls. He commissioned epic poetry about it. He basically invented ancient propaganda. But the full story, the real story, is so much more interesting than the myth. It's about two superpowers colliding, about intelligence failures, about one king's terrifying courage and another king's brilliant strategy, about a peace treaty that was so remarkable, a copy of it hangs in the United Nations building in New York City to this day. This one's going to take a while. Get comfortable. To understand Kadesh, you first need to understand the world of 1274 BC, because this was not a primitive world, not by a long shot. The year is roughly 1274, before the Common Era, what we used to call BC. We are in what historians call the Late Bronze Age. And the Late Bronze Age was, in many ways, the first globalized world. There were great empires, international trade networks, diplomatic correspondence between kings who wrote to each other as brothers, and technology, bronze weapons, chariots, fortified cities, that was genuinely sophisticated at this moment in history. There are essentially two superpowers dividing the known world between them. The first is Egypt. Ancient Egypt at its height is almost impossible to overstate. The Nile Valley civilization had been going for nearly 2,000 years already by 1274 BC. 2,000 years. For context, we are further in time from Julius Caesar than Julius Caesar was from the pyramids of Giza. Egypt was old even in the ancient world. It was wealthy beyond imagination. The Nile flooded every year, depositing rich black silt that made agriculture absurdly productive. Egypt had gold mines in Nubia. It had trade networks reaching Punt in East Africa and Byblos in Lebanon. It had a professional army, a massive bureaucracy, and a pharaoh who was considered literally a god walking on earth. The second superpower is one most people have never heard of, the Hittites. And this is a shame, because the Hittites were extraordinary. The Hittite Empire was based in Anatolia, what is now Turkey. They were possibly the first people in history to smelt iron, giving them a metallurgical edge that would eventually change the entire world. They had a sophisticated legal code. They had a complex religious system that absorbed and respected the gods of conquered peoples rather than destroying them. They were skilled diplomats and ferocious warriors. Their capital, Hattusa, was a massive fortified city in the mountains of central Anatolia, and at their height, they controlled territory from the Aegean coast almost to Mesopotamia. These two empires had been bumping into each other for decades, and the place they kept bumping into each other was the region we now call the Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, a strip of land that, as you may have noticed, has been contested by great powers for approximately all of recorded history. Right in the middle of this contested zone sat a city called Kadesh, and whoever controlled Kadesh controlled the trade routes of the entire region. Both empires wanted it. Neither would give it up without a fight. The fight was coming. Now, let's talk about the man at the center of this story, because Ramesses II is one of the most fascinating personalities in all of ancient history. He was born around 1303 BC, the son of Pharaoh Seti I. From childhood, he was groomed for power. He accompanied his father on military campaigns as a young boy, literally rode into battle as a child to learn warfare firsthand. By his teenage years, he was commanding armies. By his early 20s, he was co-regent, ruling Egypt alongside his father. When Seti died around 1290 BC, Ramesses became sole Pharaoh of Egypt. He was around 25 years old. Ramesses would reign for 66 years. 66 years. He outlived 12 of his own sons. He fathered somewhere between 48 and 100 children, depending on which source you trust. He built more temples, monuments, and statues than any other pharaoh in Egyptian history. He put his name on buildings other pharaohs had built. He was, essentially, the ancient world's greatest self-promoter. But here's what is crucial to understand. Ramesses was not just a blowhard. He was genuinely talented. He was a skilled military commander. He was a competent administrator. He made Egypt prosperous and stable for most of his long reign. His problem, and this is the problem that nearly gets him killed at Kadesh, was overconfidence. He believed his own mythology. He thought he was invincible because everyone told him he was invincible, and because he himself had helped build that reputation from the ground up. When you spend your whole life being told you're a god, you start to act like one. And gods, it turns out, can still ride into ambushes. Now let's talk about the man who set the trap. His name was Muwatalli II, and he is one of the most underrated figures in ancient history. While Ramesses gets all the glory, all the temple carvings, all the poetry, all the modern documentaries, Muwatalli was, by almost any objective military analysis, the better strategist at Kadesh. Muwatalli had been king of the Hittites since around 1295 BC. He was a pragmatic, methodical ruler. He knew Egypt was coming. He had been watching Ramesses' early campaigns, the Egyptian army's movements, their supply lines, their tactics. He had time to prepare, and his preparation was extraordinary. Muwatalli assembled what ancient sources describe as the largest army the Hittite Empire had ever put in the field. He called in allies from across Anatolia and the Near East, vassal states, allied kingdoms, mercenary forces. Ancient Egyptian records, which we have to take with a grain of salt since they were written by Ramesses himself, list 2,500 Hittite chariots and 37,000 infantry. Modern historians think the actual numbers were probably somewhat lower, but still enormous. Perhaps 17,000 to 20,000 total fighters. He positioned this entire army behind the city of Kadesh, hidden, completely out of sight, and then he sent out spies. Not to gather information. He already had that. He sent spies to give Ramesses false information. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Trick Ramesses into thinking the Hittite army was far away, get him to advance his forces carelessly, then spring the trap when the Egyptians were most vulnerable. It very nearly worked perfectly. In the spring of year 5 of Ramesses' reign, roughly 1274 BC, the Egyptian army set out from its base in the eastern Nile Delta and marched north toward Kadesh. This was a massive logistical operation, and we actually know quite a lot about it because Ramesses commissioned 2 detailed accounts of the campaign: the Poem of Pentor, an epic literary account, and the Bulletin, a more factual military dispatch. Both survive. Both are carved on temple walls across Egypt. They are the most detailed accounts of any battle from the ancient world. The Egyptian army was divided into 4 divisions, each named after a major god. The division of Ammonius, Ramesses' own division, the elite corps of the army, roughly 5,000 men. The division of Ra, the division of Ta, the division of Set, together, probably around 20,000 soldiers and 2,000 chariots. A significant force. They also had a separate unit called the Nearin, a special force that had been sent ahead by a different coastal route. This would matter later. Crucially, the Egyptian army marched in column, each division separated by several miles. This was standard practice for long marches. You couldn't keep 20,000 men in one tight formation for hundreds of miles. They would spread out, march, and then consolidate at the destination. This separation is the key vulnerability Muwatalli was counting on. After weeks of marching, Ramesses and the division of Ammonius crossed the Orontes River and approached Kadesh from the south. They had seen no Hittites, no enemy scouts, no signs of opposition at all. And then 2 Bedouin men appeared on the road. 2 Bedouin tribesmen were brought before Ramesses. They claimed to be deserters from the Hittite army who wanted to switch sides and serve Egypt. Ramesses questioned them through interpreters. Where was the Hittite army? The men answered, far away. The Hittite army was still up near Aleppo, more than 100 miles to the north. They had heard of Egypt's approach and were afraid to fight. They were waiting, hesitating, considering retreat. This was exactly what Ramesses wanted to hear. Think about what this information does to a man who already believes he is invincible. The enemy is far away. They're scared. This is going to be easy. Ramesses ordered an accelerated advance. He pushed the division of Ammonius forward quickly, crossing the river and making camp just northwest of Kadesh. He did not wait for the other 3 divisions, which were still strung out along the road behind him, miles away. He set up his command tent. His officers gathered. They were relaxed. They were confident. They were making plans for a siege of Kadesh. And then Ramesses' scouts brought in 2 more men, Hittite scouts who had been caught near the camp. Ramesses ordered them beaten until they talked. They talked. The Hittite army was not in Aleppo. The Hittite army was not 100 miles away. The Hittite army was behind Kadesh, right there, hidden just on the other side of the city. The entire force, 20,000 soldiers, thousands of chariots, waiting. The 2 Bedouin deserters had been Hittite agents, sent specifically to lure Ramesses forward. The trap had worked. Ramesses had walked straight into it. He was in camp with 1 division. His other 3 divisions were miles down the road, strung out in column. He had no time to recall them. He had no time to prepare. He immediately sent messengers galloping south to urgently summon his officers. He began frantically organizing what defenses he could. He was too late. The Hittites were already moving. 2,500 Hittite chariots burst around the southern side of Kadesh and slammed into the division of Ra as it marched north along the road. Now let me paint you a picture of what a chariot charge looked like in 1274 BC, because this is not Hollywood. These weren't just fast wagons. The chariot was the main battle tank of the Bronze Age. Each Hittite chariot carried 3 men, a driver, a shield bearer, and a warrior armed with spears and javelins. The Hittite chariots were heavier and more stable than the Egyptian ones, built for impact rather than speed. 2,500 of these vehicles, each carrying 3 armored men, hit troops who were marching in column, not in battle formation. Marching. The result was a massacre. The division of Ra shattered. Soldiers who had been walking in orderly column suddenly found themselves being ridden down by thousands of chariots coming at them from flank. Men scattered in every direction. Officers tried to rally their troops and were cut down. The entire division essentially ceased to exist as a fighting force in the opening minutes of the battle. The survivors ran. Where did they run? North, toward the Egyptian camp, toward Ramesses. Thousands of panicked Egyptian soldiers, fleeing for their lives, burst into Ramesses' camp. Behind them came the Hittite chariots. The camp erupted into chaos. Soldiers grabbed what they could and ran. Officers and servants fled. Even Ramesses' own household troops, the shield bearers of Pharaoh, broke and ran. For a few terrible minutes, Ramesses II, Pharaoh of Egypt, living god, ruler of the 2 lands, was essentially alone. Almost everyone had abandoned him. What happened next is described in the poem of Pentor in language that is simultaneously absurd propaganda and, based on everything we know, genuinely reflecting something real. Because here's the thing, Ramesses did not run. A lesser man, a man who had simply been handed power, who had never truly been tested, might have fled. The practical, survivable choice was to get on a horse and ride south as fast as possible. Ramesses got in his chariot. He later wrote, or had written for him, this account of what happened next. He prayed. He called on his god Ammonius. He said, "What is this, Father Ammonius? Has a father forgotten his son? Have I done anything without you? Did I not walk and stand according to your command? I have not transgressed your commands. How great and mighty is the great Lord of Egypt, who permits foreigners to come near him. What do these Asiatics matter to Ammonius?" And then, reportedly, he felt a surge of divine strength. Now, We can strip away the religious language and the propaganda and ask, what actually happened? What we know from the physical evidence and from cross-referencing with Hittite sources is this. Ramesses, surrounded by Hittite chariots in and around his camp, began to fight his way out, personally, in his chariot. He charges. He drives his chariot directly into the mass of Hittite chariots. He has a small group of his personal guard, probably a few dozen men, who haven't run. They fight with him. The poem describes him making 6 charges. 6 times he drives his chariot into the Hittite mass. Each time he comes back. Each time he goes again. Was it really 6 charges? Was it really just him, alone against thousands? Probably not. The poem is propaganda, after all. But the core fact remains. Ramesses fought rather than fled, and he survived, and this genuinely surprised everyone, including the Hittites. And then, from an unexpected direction, salvation arrived. Remember the Nearan? The special Egyptian force that had been sent ahead by the coastal route? They arrived at exactly the right moment, from exactly the direction the Hittites weren't watching. The Nearan, fresh, organized, not yet in any battle, hit the Hittite chariots from the flank and rear while they were still in and around the Egyptian camp. Suddenly the Hittites, who had been running over scattered Egyptian soldiers, found themselves under coordinated attack from an unexpected direction. The Hittite chariots were heavy vehicles, brilliant for the initial charge, for breaking formations in open ground, but they were not well suited to fighting in the tight quarters of camp, surrounded by tents and supplies and wagons, being attacked from multiple directions. They began to get tangled, confused, disorganized. And here's where one of history's great accidents of war changed everything. The Hittite charioteers, many of them, stopped fighting. They started looting. They were in an enemy camp full of Egyptian supplies, food, gold, weapons, and valuables. The discipline of the assault began to collapse as men started grabbing things. Mu'attali, watching from across the river, saw this. He sent in more chariots, a second wave, to reinforce the assault and restore discipline. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The Nearan were fighting effectively. Ramesses was still fighting, still in his chariot, still charging. And now the division of Ta, which had been south on the road, arrived at the edge of the battle. The Hittites, caught between the Nearan, Ramesses' personal guard, and the arriving division of Ta, began to withdraw. They pulled back toward the river. Some tried to swim the Orontes and drowned. Some were cut down. Some made it back to the Hittite lines. The immediate crisis was over. Ramesses had survived. But, and this is critical, he had not won. Not even close. Here is what the temples don't tell you. Here is what the poem of Pentor glosses over with heroic language. Here is the reality of the military situation at the end of the first day of Kadesh. Kadesh was still in Hittite hands. Ramesses had not taken it. The Egyptian army had taken severe losses. The division of Ra was effectively destroyed as a fighting force. The camp had been partially looted. Officers were dead. Morale was shaken. The Hittite army was still intact. Mu'attali still had most of his infantry, which he had held in reserve and never fully committed to the battle. He still had the city of Kadesh. He still controlled the ground. The next day, both sides fought again. The accounts get murkier here, less detail in the Egyptian records, which tells you something. What we know is that the battle was indecisive. Neither side could deliver a knockout blow. The Hittites couldn't destroy what remained of the Egyptian army. The Egyptians couldn't take Kadesh or defeat the Hittite force. Eventually, Mu'attali made an offer, a ceasefire. Both sides had taken casualties. Both sides retired. The practical outcome of continuing to fight was probably more losses on both sides with no clear winner. Ramesses accepted. He turned around. He marched his army back to Egypt. Without Kadesh, without a victory, without the objective he had set out to achieve. By any objective military analysis, Kadesh was either a draw or a slight Hittite victory. Mu'attali kept Kadesh. Egypt went home. And then Ramesses went home and told everyone he had won the greatest victory in the history of the world. He commissioned the poem of Pentor. He had it carved in enormous hieroglyphs on the walls of 5 major temples, including Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, and the Ramesseum. Every version emphasized his personal courage, which was real, and his divine intervention, which was creative, and completely minimized the fact that he hadn't actually taken Kadesh or defeated the Hittites. It is the most successful piece of political spin in the ancient world. And it worked. For 3,000 years, Ramesses was remembered as a hero of Kadesh, the great warrior pharaoh. Only in the last century or two, as archaeologists and historians have cross-referenced Egyptian sources with Hittite records, have we been able to reconstruct what actually happened. The Hittites, for their part, also claimed victory. Both sides claimed victory. There was no winner, but only one side carved it on their temples in letters 30 feet high. And that, in the long game of history, is what matters. Now here's where the story takes a turn that I find genuinely remarkable. Something that, in the cynical era we live in, feels almost impossible to believe. 16 years after Kadesh, around 1259 BC, Ramesses II and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, signed a peace treaty, the earliest surviving peace treaty in human history. And this treaty is not a treaty of surrender, not a victors and vanquished document. It is a genuine mutual agreement between equals. Both sides agreed to stop fighting. Both sides agreed to return refugees and escaped slaves to their home countries without punishment. Both sides agreed to mutual defense. If a third party attacked Egypt, the Hittites would help. If a third party attacked Hutti, Egypt would help. Both sides swore before their respective gods to uphold the terms. The original treaty was written on silver tablets. Those tablets are lost, but copies in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Hittite cuneiform, a Mesopotamian writing system, survive. We have the Egyptian version from temple walls. We have the Hittite version from clay tablets found at Hattusa in the early 20th century. And a copy of this treaty, this 3,300-year-old document between Ramesses II and Hattusili III, hangs on a wall at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, because the United Nations placed it there as a symbol of what diplomacy can achieve, as a reminder that even the greatest enemies, even empires that spent decades killing each other, can choose peace. I find that extraordinarily moving, don't you? And there's more. To seal the peace, Hattusili sent his daughter to Egypt to become one of Ramesses' wives. Ramesses gave her an Egyptian name and, characteristically, made sure everyone knew about it. The two former enemies became, in the language of the treaty, brothers, and the peace held for the rest of both their reigns. The two great powers of the Bronze Age stopped fighting. Trade flourished. Letters were exchanged. When Hattusili fell ill, Ramesses reportedly sent him Egyptian physicians. In a world of constant war and conquest, this was genuinely extraordinary. Ramesses II went on to reign until around 1213 BC. 66 years as pharaoh. He was probably in his 90s when he died, which was almost unheard of in the ancient world. His mummy survives. You can go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and look at his face. He has a long, narrow face, a strong jaw, a slightly hooked nose. He was clearly a tall man for his era. His mummy was discovered in 1881 in a cache at Deir el-Bahri, where priests had hidden the royal mummies to protect them from tomb robbers. He was found wrapped in linen with flowers placed around him. The ancient Egyptians clearly still revered him centuries after his death. In 1974, archaeologists noticed his mummy was deteriorating rapidly. The Egyptian government made an extraordinary decision. They issued Ramesses II a passport, listing his occupation as king deceased, and flew into Paris for emergency conservation treatment. He arrived at Le Bourget airport with full military honors, as was technically required by French protocol for a head of state. A 3,000-year-old mummy, full military honors, at a French airport. I cannot tell you why I find this so delightful, but I do. During his 66-year reign, Ramesses built more than almost any other pharaoh. Abu Simbel, the enormous temple with the four seated colossal statues of Ramesses himself at the entrance, is his. The Ramesseum in Luxor is his. Additions to Karnak and Luxor temples. The city of Pir Rames in the Delta. He is the pharaoh whose colossal statue Shelley wrote about in the poem Ozymandias. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Although, given that Ramesses is still very much remembered and his works still very much standing, Shelley's point about the vanity of monuments is perhaps a bit undermined in this particular case. And what are the Hittites? What happened to the other superpower in this story? The Hittite Empire had another century or so of power after Kadesh, the peace with Egypt held. But in the late 1200s and early 1200s BC, something happened that remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history: the Late Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BC, roughly 60 to 70 years after Kadesh, virtually every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean collapsed simultaneously. The Mycenaean Greeks disappeared. The Canaanite cities were destroyed. The Egyptian New Kingdom, the same empire Ramesses, began its long decline. Ugarit, one of the great trading cities of Syria, was burned and never rebuilt. And the Hittites? The Hittite Empire ceased to exist almost overnight. Their capital, Hattusa, was burned. The royal family disappeared. The Hittite state, which had rivaled Egypt for centuries, vanished so completely that Europeans in the 1800s didn't even know it had existed. It was rediscovered only through archaeological excavation in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What caused the Bronze Age collapse? Historians have debated this for decades. The leading theories include a wave of invasions by mysterious sea peoples, possibly including ancestors of the Philistines, severe drought across the region lasting decades, disruption of the complex trade networks that Bronze Age civilizations depended on, perhaps caused by multiple smaller crises compounding together, internal rebellions, earthquakes. Most modern historians think it was all of these things at once, a perfect storm of catastrophes that overwhelmed civilizations that were already interconnected and therefore fragile. The world of Ramesses and Muwatalli, that sophisticated, globalized, diplomatically complex Bronze Age world, was almost entirely destroyed within a century of their peace treaty. History is ruthless. Let's talk about legacy, because Ramesses II has had a cultural afterlife that is almost as remarkable as his actual life. Many historians believe Ramesses II, or at least his reign, is a historical background for the Exodus story. The Bible's account of Moses and the Pharaoh, the oppression, the plagues, the Israelites in Egypt. If these events have any historical basis, Ramesses II is the most commonly suggested candidate for Pharaoh in question. He used massive slave labor for his building projects. He ruled during the period when, if a historical exodus occurred, it most likely would have happened. His city of Ramesses is mentioned in the book of Exodus. This is not proven. Many historians are skeptical that the Exodus, as described in the Bible, happened historically at all. There is no direct Egyptian record of it. But the connection has made Ramesses perhaps the most famous pharaoh in Western culture. He was Yul-Brynner in the Ten Commandments. He was Ralph Fiennes in The Prince of Egypt. Even apart from Exodus, Ramesses has fascinated people for millennia. The Greeks knew of him as Ozymandias or Sesostris. In the medieval Islamic world, he was known from Egyptian tradition. Napoleon's soldiers encountered his colossal statues and were astounded. When Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics in the 1820s, one of the first things Egyptologists did was read the inscriptions of Ramesses II, and the quantity and boastfulness of them immediately established his character across time. And his mummy, that actual face, those actual bones, makes it viscerally real in a way that few historical figures can match. You can look at him. He died 3,230 years ago, and you can look at his face. There is something profound about that. So what do we take from all of this? What does a battle that happened 3,274 years ago have to say to us today? A few things, I think. First, intelligence matters more than courage. Ramesses was brave, genuinely, almost recklessly brave. He didn't run when he should have run, but he rode into that ambush because he heard what he wanted to hear. Two fake deserters told him the enemy was far away, and he believed them because belief was convenient. Every leader in history who has charged forward on bad intelligence has paid for it. Kadesh is the oldest example we have. Second, the relationship between truth and power is complicated and always has been. Ramesses lost, or at best drew, and he turned it into the greatest victory ever won. This is not unique to ancient Egypt. Every government in history has managed its own narrative. Every powerful person has put the best possible face on their worst moments. What's remarkable about Ramesses is just how good he was at it, and how long it worked. 3,000 years. Third, and this is the one I find most moving, even the fiercest enemies can make peace. Egypt and the Hittites fought for over a century. They killed thousands of each other's soldiers. They raided each other's territories. They were bitter, long-standing rivals. And then they sat down, negotiated in good faith, and signed a peace treaty that held for the rest of both their lifetimes. And a copy of that treaty hangs in the United Nations. That's not naive optimism. That's documented history. It happened. The hardest enemies, in the worst circumstances, can choose differently. And fourth, empires end. No matter how powerful, no matter how long they last. Egypt lasted 3,000 years. 3,000 years. And it ended. The Hittites lasted 500 years. And they vanished so completely we forgot they existed. The Bronze Age world, that sophisticated, globalized, treaty-making civilization, collapsed in a generation. What we build is not permanent. What we do with the time we have is what remains. Ramesses II lived to be 90. He outlived his children. He outlived his enemies. He outlived his world. When he died, the Egypt he left behind was already beginning the long decline that would eventually end with Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, dying in 30 BC and Egypt becoming a Roman province. His mummy lay hidden in a cliff for 3,000 years. And then a farmer discovered it, and now it's in a museum in Cairo, and you can buy a poster of it. Time is strange. If you made it here, to the end of 2 hours about a battle that happened before the alphabet existed, before iron was common, before Homer wrote the Iliad, then thank you, genuinely. This story deserved to be told properly, and you honored it by listening to the whole thing. Next video, I'm thinking about the Mongol invasion of Japan, the typhoon that saved a civilization, or the Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave revolt in history, the one that beat Napoleon. Comment below, which one do you want first? Subscribe, hit the bell. I post one of these every single Friday. Until then, stay curious. The past is stranger and richer than you imagine.